as you may well know, I thought that the Terence Crawford-Victor Postal fight on Saturday was a terrible fight to watch. I thought it was very boring. And whenever I make these type of comments about particular fights or about particular fighters, I usually get certain individuals coming out the woodwork accusing me of being whatever, a casual boxing fan, or saying I don't appreciate real boxing, or saying that I should like fighters who fight in that type of way or fights like that because it shows skill and the fighter is not going out there and getting his head bashed around, and it's not like Rock'em Sock'em Robots. If you want to go watch that, go watch something else. This is the kind of comments that people come out with. Well, again, I have to address this. And this school of thought that there is either boring boxing where you're running around the ring, being extremely defensive, hardly throwing any punches. To them, that's great. Or there is Rock'em Sock'em Robots where you're standing in the middle of the ring like Ward Gatty. As far as they're concerned, there's only two options. There's either you're running around the ring defensively or Rock'em Sock'em Robots. There's nothing in between, according to these people. Now again, I have to remind you, prime Roy Jones Jr. hardly got hit, but yet he was offensive. He threw plenty of punches. He was knocking people out in spectacular fashion. It was exciting, but yet he wasn't getting hit. Even a prime Mike Tyson, in many of his fights, he hardly took a clean punch, but yet he was exciting. So this idea that you can't be exciting, you can't get knockouts whilst being defensively sound at the same time is just pure BS. You can. James Toney was a fighter in his prime. In many of his fights, he was very good defensively, but yet he was offensively active. He was scoring knockouts. He was hurting people. He was knocking them out. He was exciting. Even right now, Anthony Joshua, is he getting hit a lot? Joshua hardly gets hit, but yet he's knocking people out in spectacular fashion. I've criticized David Haye a lot on this channel, but go and look at David Haye throughout his career. He don't get hit much. In a Chisora fight, he didn't get hit much, but yet he still scored a spectacular knockout. And he's had several fights like that in his career, where he hasn't been getting hit much, but he still managed to score great KOs. And even Terence Crawford himself, apart from the Victor Postal fight on Saturday, he's normally excited, although he does get hit a bit. The point I'm making is there is not only two options here, people. There's not either you like Rock'em Sock'em Robots or you like a guy running around the ring on his bike being extremely defensive. There are not two options. There's plenty of middle ground here, people. Yeah? Just because I don't like the way, or I wasn't entertained by the way Terence Crawford fought against Victor Postal, it don't mean that I want to see everybody fight like Ward Gatty and everybody fight like Brandon Rios or whatever. No, not at all. I can appreciate skill. But at the end of the day, a guy who was as low volume as Terence Crawford against Victor Postal, who was doing as much running around the ring as he was in that fight, I don't care which way you look at it, that is not entertaining. At least not to me, and at least not to the majority of boxing fans. And I don't think people should be angry or criticizing individuals who don't find a fight like that entertaining. People do want to see knockouts. People do want to see blood. That's what they want to see. It don't mean it has to be Rock'em Sock'em Robots, but they want to see at least one of the fighters dishing out serious punishment, laying people down. That's what people want to see. That's why people liked Tommy Hearns, because he was laying people down. That's why people like Mike Tyson. And there's nothing wrong with liking that. I mean, any time that Terence Crawford has laid people down, nobody's been complaining. So why is it that you complain when people don't like the fact that he fought a defensive fight for once. It don't make no sense. If Crawford had knocked Postal out, you would have been cheering from the rooftops. That was a great knockout. It was brutal. Yes. You wouldn't have been complaining. So what's happening here with this whole defensive thing? Let's get it straight. And I was having a debate about this online the other day. And Dwyer's talked about this actually. Let me speak specifically to the things Dwyer has actually said. And don't get it twisted. I rate Dwyer very highly. This guy's literally, a big influence on my channel. And this is not meant in any type of disrespect. But Dwyer has made a couple of videos where he talks about boxing styles. And he said that we shouldn't be ascribing certain styles to certain ethnic groups or certain nationalities. For example, people talk about the African American boxing style or the Mexican boxing style and what have you. Now, I don't see any problem with ascribing, these type of titles to certain nationalities or ethnic groups. The African American boxing style, there is an African American boxing style, a general style that African American fighters tend to use, which is, slick boxing, movement, relying on athleticism a lot, and what have you. A lot of fast, explosive movements. And obviously the African American style has evolved over the decades. If you go back to the 1920s, the style of boxing that everybody was fighting was very different than now. But with regards to the African American style of boxing, it tends to be centered around whoever the most successful African American fighter is at the time. So when Sugar Ray Robinson was the top African American fighter, you had a whole heap of young African Americans trying to fight like Sugar Ray Robinson, including Muhammad Ali, who admitted that his whole style was based on Sugar Ray Robinson. And then when Ali came up, if you remember, particularly towards the late 70s, and then throughout the 80s, there was a whole heap of fighters, particularly heavyweights and even lighter weights like Sugar Ray Leonard, who openly admitted that they had based their style on Muhammad Ali. So that style, you could say, was the African American style for the time. And these days, you got Floyd Mayweather. I mean, in the 90s, you had Roy Jones. A lot of people were influenced by Roy Jones's style. A lot of African Americans. I mean, not just African Americans, people outside of America were influenced by the style. But generally speaking, it was a style that was most commonly found within the African American boxing community. Okay, because people do tend to look up to people who are like them. Yeah? So, yeah, the 90s, a lot of people were copying Roy Jones, and now a lot of people are trying to emulate what Mayweather does. Base their style on what Mayweather does, maybe tweak it a little bit and add to it. And it's not every African American fighter that's doing it, no. But there's a large proportion of African American fighters who at least base their style on a Floyd Mayweather, etc. So, yeah, I don't see any problem with saying an African American style or a Mexican style. You look at Mexican fighters, the vast majority of Mexican fighters are come forward pressure fighters. I mean, tell me I'm wrong. Compare how many come forward pressure fighters there are who are African American compared to how many come forward pressure fighters there are that are Mexican. There's a hell of a lot more Mexican pressure fighters than African American pressure fighters. So again, there's no problem ascribing these titles to these things. The Mexicans, we're just talking in general terms here. We're not saying every single person who's a pressure fighter has to be Mexican. Not at all. We're not saying every single fighter who, fights in a Floyd Mayweather. I mean, Lee Selby is not African American, but yet you could say that's the prototypical African American boxing style that Lee Selby uses. It don't mean you have to be African American to use it. It don't mean you have to be African American to be good at using it. But it's just acknowledging the fact that this style was, if not created, then at least popularized by African American fighters. Okay, just like with the Mexican pressure style, and they have a specific pressure style. It's not just any old pressure style. Mexican fighters don't fight the way Mike Tyson did. Mike Tyson was a pressure fighter, but that wasn't a Mexican style pressure fighter. So the Mexican style pressure fighting is different. There's an emphasis on the left hook to the body, particularly after Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. came along. There was a lot of, body work and what have you. So Ricky Hatton, for example, called himself the Mancunian Mexican. He even wore long shorts like a lot of Mexicans did at the time with the tassels and all that type of stuff to kind of play up that whole Mancunian Mexican thing. And his style was based on that Mexican come forward pressure style. So yeah, I do disagree with Dwyer on that, because Dwyer basically thinks that we shouldn't ascribe these labels and say this is an African American style. This is, well, I don't see any problem with it, to be honest. I think it's perfectly understandable. You look at Germany, for example. The fighters in Germany, most of them tend to have a very similar style. They teach a certain style of boxing out there in Germany. Look at Arthur Abraham, Felix Sturm, Marco Huck, even go back to Sven Otkar. These guys all have a very similar style. That's the kind of style they teach in Germany, where your hands are held high, emphasis on the jab. That's the German style, I guess you could say. And the German style is quite similar to the Ghanaian style, actually, of boxing, the modern day Ghanaian style of boxing, where you have people like Clottey. What's the guy's first name now? I can't remember Clottey's first name. But anyway, you got Clottey. Before him, obviously, you had Ike Quartey, the Bazooka Quartey, Joshua Clottey, that's his name. And they tend to fight, if you watch most Ghanaian fighters, they tend to fight in a similar style to the Germans, with hands held high, a passive defense where they take the punches on the gloves and arms, and then they respond back and good, strong jabs and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, I've gone off on a little tangent here, people. Yeah, I've been sidetracked from my original point, which was that there is not only one style of boxing. And the point I was going to make is, during this modern age, particularly the past 10, 12 years, due to Floyd Mayweather coming along and having this defensive style, he's popularized this style, particularly among African-American boxing fans and black people generally. Because let's not get it confused, a lot of black people, and a lot of any ethnicity of people tend to gravitate and support people who they perceive as being like themselves. Whether it's somebody of the same race, somebody of the same religion, somebody of the same nationality, etc., etc. People don't like to talk about that, but it's a fact. It's not like every single person does it. No. A lot of people don't care about what race the guy is. They're not going to support him or gravitate towards him just because he's the same race as them and successful. Some people don't, but a hell of a lot of people do. Whether they do it on a conscious level or subconscious level. And with this whole defensive boxing thing, which has become popularized by Floyd Mayweather, and now you've got Andre Ward and people like that, Bernard Hopkins, etc. Because this has become popular among black boxing fans, they feel now the need to defend it. And anybody who criticizes that style, oh, well, you don't know real boxing. And what they're really doing is they're defending the fact that they like certain fighters based on their ethnicity. That's, to me, basically what it is. I'm not saying that in every case. No. Some people, and there are plenty of non-black people who like defensive boxing. Yeah, certain people like what they like. But a hell of a lot of people who are defending, extremely defensive fighters like Eris Landy Lara and all these kind of people, they're doing it because they're black. They like supporting black fighters who are successful. And therefore, no matter what that black fighter does, they're going to defend it. Whether he fights a boring fight, they're going to find a way to defend the fact that he fought a boring fight and criticize anybody who says that it was boring. That's what's really going on in a majority of cases. Again, I am not saying that for all people. There are plenty of white people I've come across who they say, oh, I like Andre Ward. I like Floyd Mayweather. I don't care if people say they're boring. I like their particular style. Cool. No problem with that. But I'm just acknowledging the fact that, there is some type of bias there when it comes to defending this defensive boxing in the modern age for a lot of people. And again, I'm not criticizing anybody who likes defensive boxing. If you like it, you genuinely like it, even if it's the whole bias thing, and you're trying to defend the style because you always gravitate towards successful black people. Whatever the case may be, if you like that style and you find it entertaining, cool. I ain't got a problem with that. But don't have a problem with me or anybody else who don't like that kind of style of boxing or finds that kind of style of boxing boring. Don't get it twisted. I understand how skillful Terence Crawford was in that fight. That was very skillful. And tactically, it was a masterclass. But I didn't find it entertaining at all. I want to see people get laid down. That's what I want to see. I want to see somebody like a Tommy Hearns crack people in the jaw. Yeah, that's why I like watching the heavyweights. Because these people lay people down. That's what they're doing. When Deontay Wilder goes out there, he's laying somebody down. Same with Joshua. Same with most of these guys. They're laying you down. That's why Mike Tyson was so popular. That's why I like the cruiserweights. Hell of a lot of people laying people down in the cruiserweight division, even the light heavyweights. I like watching Stevenson. I like watching Kovalev. Now, particularly when you're talking about Stevenson, Stevenson hardly gets hit. Yeah, there's a couple fights, like the Fonfara fight where he took a few shots. But generally speaking, Stevenson hardly gets hit. But yet he's still laying people down. And that's what I like. I don't mind the guy not getting hit. I don't need rock'em sock'em robots. And Stevenson ain't getting hit much. So he's avoiding your shots, and then he's coming back with that big left hand, and he's cracking your damn jaw. And that's what I want to see. Yeah? So anyway, little bit of a long-winded video here, people. I hope you stuck with it over the course. Yeah, kind of an interesting debate. Maybe I should have made a separate video about boxing styles. You know, the African-American boxing style, the Mexican boxing style, the German boxing style, the Ghanaian boxing style. I've mentioned in other videos there's a difference, and some people hadn't noticed this before, but African fighters from places like Ghana, etc., tend to have a very different approach to boxing than African American fighters do. You don't tend to find many slick Ghanaian fighters, for example. They tend to be strong guys who come forward, high held guard, good jab, etc. They don't tend to be fancy dans. They don't tend to be like an Andre Dirrell type, or a Mayweather type, or a Crawford, or what have you. They don't tend to fight like that, or, you know, an Andrade. You don't find African fighters fighting like that very often, particularly not Ghanaians anyway. Even in Britain, the style in Britain, the boxing style has changed a lot. And I think the fact that it's changed a lot has led to success. In Britain, there is no particular British style, I would say, because British trainers and British boxers have taken so much influence from so many different styles. I think the two main influences on British boxing have been the Mexican style and the African American style. I mean, you can look at David Haye and you know that his style is based on Roy Jones Jr. He even admitted that himself. But then you look at, you know, other camps. Obviously, Ricky Hatton admitted that his style was based on a lot of Latino fighters, Roberto Duran and Julio Cesar Chavez, etc. So yeah, Britain has taken a lot of influence in terms of boxing styles from other countries. And I think that has led to Britain being a lot more successful. Now Britain has got more world champions than the United States has got, last time I checked anyway. And that's pretty extraordinary considering how much bigger the United States is than the United Kingdom. So yeah, you know, Britain doesn't really have a style like that. Although there are certain gyms in Britain that have particular styles. And the one that springs to mind the most is the Winkerbank gym in Sheffield. They produced a particular type of boxing style, which Kell Brook doesn't use, it has to be said. But particularly in the 90s, you had Prince Nassim, you had Harold Graham, who is said to be the originator of that style. You had Prince Nassim, Harold Graham, you had Ryan Rhodes, you had Pele Reed, you had Clifton Mitchell, you had Johnny Nelson, and several other fighters who are essentially fighting in the exact same way, which was a very unorthodox style, switch hitting, hands low, pretty much what you see Prince Naseem doing. They all had their slight variations of it. Did I mention Junior Witter? He was another one. So yeah, there was a particular style that came out of that gym. And actually during the 90s, other gyms were trying to copy that style because it was successful. And that's how these things emerge, as I mentioned previously in the video. Let's say the Winkerbank gym was in Cuba rather than in the United Kingdom. And it was producing world champion after world champion. The rest of the country is then going to look at that gym and try and emulate what that gym's doing. And before you know it, the whole nation, or the majority of the nation's boxers, are fighting in this particular style. That's how these things come about. People follow who's successful within their own geographical location, or even within their own ethnicity. And these styles emerge. And speaking of Cuba, again, you look at the Cuban professionals. How many Cuban professionals are pressure fighters, come forward pressure fighters? Very few. Very, very few. Most Cuban boxers are technically sound, usually boxer punchers, but in the case of Erislandy Lara and Guillermo Rigondeaux, they're more back foot counter punchers. Okay? But generally speaking, as I say, they're technical fighters. They're not pressure fighters. Count the percentage of pressure fighters who are Cuban and compare it to the percentage of pressure fighters who are Mexican. It's not even close. So I don't see why there's a problem with saying that this is a Cuban style or this is a Mexican style. We're talking in general terms. We're not saying there can't be exceptions. We're not saying that people outside of that demographic can't also adopt that style and be successful with it. That's not what we're saying. We're just acknowledging where the style came from, or at least who popularized the style. Which region of the world or which ethnic group or which nationality popularized that particular style. That's all it is. So anyway, very long video here, people. Shout out to anyone who made it to the end with me. My whole point is, which is very long and drawn out, there isn't just two choices. There isn't just either defensive boxing or rock'em sock'em robots. There's plenty of middle ground. There's plenty of Adonis Stevenson type situations out there where a guy can be defensively sound and slick and moving around, but you also take your head off. Yeah, you don't have to fight a purely defensive fight. Anyway, people, it's your boy Hatman. I'm out.